Give me 1 second. There you go. All right, we're gonna get started in about 5 minutes. See where this is going? What on earth are you watching? Oh, what Dad said? Oh, okay. I haven't watched that yet. All right, we're going to get started in about 1 minute. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen as we start to. And I have the chat up, so feel free to ask questions in the chat if you have them. But we're going to go ahead and get started. So, goodness. Happy Friday. My name is Elle. I am the fairy godmother of trans kids. And this is another week of Hack the Patriarchy. Today we're going to be going through narratives to codes, and then that's going to move us into signals next week. So just kind of slowly going through the various levels of decoding what is going on in the world, what we have been taught, what we know to be true, what we don't know to be true, all of those cognitive questions and how they relate to technology and how the tech bros are taking over the world. So, it's going to be a fun time, hopefully. It's been a hell of a week, that's for sure. So this week, let's see. There we go. So last week was my car broke down, and that was a fun headache of a mess. Or maybe that was beginning of this week. I don't remember. All the days start running together after a while, and it's a whole lot of headache, but that's okay, because we're going to get through this and we're going to get through it together. So, it started with my car breaking down. So that happened, I think it was like Thursday last week. It's old car, and what happened was the engine just completely locked up, completely shot. It was, the shop told us that we either needed to, well, they said we would need to replace the engine, but whatever you do, don't replace the engine because it's not worth it. So that led into finding a new car, all the fun of going from having a vehicle that we owned outright and we're not having to pay bills on, to having a new monthly payment for a new car, but it is um it's definitely was needed and is something that is going to make, you know, moving around and moving things better because it's a Subaru Outback, so there's more room in it than the last car I had. But um, the absolute headache of getting a new car, having to go through the loan process and then going and dealing with the dealers and um, then figuring out what we were going to do with our, you know, glorified paperweight and how um, how to deal with our glorified paperweight. So that was super super fun and was just a complete headache, but we finally got through the whole process. Um, was able to get a little bit of money for our paperweight and get a new car and get that all situated. So that was nice, but it also took up a lot of time that I spend on um, planning out conversations that we're going to have, um, as well as being able to do some of the writing and coding and all of that I have been enjoying. Um, so that's where all the headache on top of just operating within the world that we currently live in. And the world we currently live in is it's such a headache. It really is. Um so the being able to connect across um the interwebs, being able to network and share information. It also opens you up to all sorts of different, both real threats and not real threats, and um, misunderstandings and hurt feelings, and all sorts of different things as we are all different people trying to explain what's going on in our heads so maybe someone can relate and understand, and being able to share our stories so that way maybe they can help someone else and someone else won't go through the same pain that we go through. But also, we have, and one of the articles that I'll be putting out probably next week is talking about the dance of tornadoes. And um, it's talking about how, especially in moments where individuals are spiraling and trying to figure out specific issues, whether that is their ADHD issues or PTSD or just emotional turmoil, trauma, all of the different things that encompasses an individual story. there are moments in time where two entities can start to clash into each other, and the different, we'll say, gravity and way the winds just kind of suck the air in different directions, um, create those clashes. And in my trying to understand and relate and make sure that as a social engineer, I am operating ethically and ensuring that as we explore these very sticky, messy topics of how society over time can cause misinformation and disinformation, and how the gossip story moves through the airwaves. Um, there is the need for open, honest, fully transparent, hey, this is the situation, this is what I'm dealing with, this is the direction I am attempting to go. If that is not for you, that's cool. And figuring out how to have all of these parallel systems of different people with different focuses. And there are going to be some that naturally work together, and there's going to be some that naturally do not work together. And being able to both define and understand those boundaries and what each person needs to do is very difficult sometimes. So, that in and of itself, especially as an individual who operates within the crisis response realm, um, there's lots of just interpersonal differences of opinions, essentially, and understanding how to work with while not trying to manipulate another person into doing it the way you want them to do it, especially when both entities are fully sovereign individuals where the way they work is the way they work and it works for them. So it's that element of learning how to not be in control of everything that can also pull us into these various states. So I really hope that made at least a little bit of sense. If not, it's all good. But that's kind of brings us into our narratives. So narratives in and of themselves come down to the story. But the other thing with this story that you have to realize is, point of view. So with each story, you have the point of view, which is, you've got your first person point of view. You have your second person. I hate it when it does that. Person. That looks good. Yeah, I like that. Sorry, my son he got some new clothes today, so he was showing those off. So, do that. There we go. And the point of view can go all the way through, the different levels of viewpoints and understanding that the story typically has the first two characters, and then the third person is that kind of observer of the story. And the observer of this story is the one that typically is giving all of the background information. So they are watching the story unfold, and a lot of moments in time they are also providing judgment on the story. So observer of the story, we've got the background. So we've got background, we've got judgment, and judgment is kind of like the assessment. They might be the ones who are highlighting what's important. And possibly giving more of a, they're highlighting what's important and why it's important. What and why. There we go. There we go. What and why it's important. So we were talking last week all about how we have these various narratives all throughout time, and the narrative in the realm of history. So who is writing the story of history? This could also be like news outlets, any sort of media where it is capturing the storyline. So as we have people who are crafting these narratives all the way from the historical context to various news outlets and media as a whole, and what is for entertainment, what is for education, because that's, so we'll go history / education. Then we've got news outlets, or really the politics of the story. Then you have media / entertainment value of the narrative in and of itself. So The elements of a good story and a good narrative highlights you know, possibility of it being a reality. So, we'll go probability of truth. And that kind of helps move into the element of the prediction markets and how narratives affect um, the viewpoints of various cultures and communities. So, as we have all of these narratives and how the narratives break out, there is the basic storyline, but within the codes, those are going to be like the underlying themes, not underlying themes, underlining themes. You also have the Easter eggs, references, and callbacks, I guess would be. And I know references and callbacks kind of, they can very well be the same thing, but within the narrative, you have that Easter egg that just kind of hides within the image something that only a few people may notice. References may be a way to relate the story to past events. Callbacks quite often are within the story itself, where it's referencing the same story, where a reference could be um, talking about something outside of the story. And how within this narrative you can have these various codes. A great example of this are meme culture, and we talked about it last week as well. The if you know, you know, and it's often unspoken or it is meant to um so it's often unspoken, or it's something that is meant to make you think. So our house, everything is about, do you understand the reference, and being able to there's the language of references, where within the conversation itself, you might have no idea what is going on because there is that unspoken piece that you are not privy to. So I like to go back to a conversation I had with some friends where we were specifically talking about operator syndrome and the impact of operating within an ever-changing world where your flight or fight stresses are almost always on, and the impact that can have on an individual's mind and body and all of that. So we hopped on a call and we started having this conversation talking about various impacts. But again, especially within cybersecurity, and we have all the different compartments of information. So the compartmented information. There's all sorts of different why can't I talk? Man, I just said the word. Compartmented information that you can provide insight to portions that you know and understand, and yet still not know the full story. And understanding that within the codes and not understanding the full story or the full impact of the story. There is also space for providing misinformation because you're not understanding exactly the context of the conversation going on, or the topic, or various things of that same element. So in compartmented information and everything that we see within the news, and that's the whole basic storyline of decoding what is true and what is accurate information. We need to, real quick, have an understanding, and I'm going to do this. Oh, actually, let me flip over here. Get to see all of my random artworks because I have the whiteboard for it somewhere. I can remember. Didn't know I had so many things, did you? Here we go. Here, so when it comes to compartmented information, and this is from episode 5 of Ask a Mom, talking about how the information cycle functions. So you have the collection of information, the processing of information, the analyzation of that information, and then the dissemination of information. So all of that comes into this process of a story and understanding the story. But when it comes to compartments, you have basically a lattice of servers, and when it comes to what information is on each server, each one is that housed compartment. So we're going to take this image here, throw it over onto our storytelling and codes. Come on. Yeah. Just for. So you have the compartmented information. So let's go to various lines of line. Okay. So we're going to take this line. And we're going to make it pink because everything's better pink, in my opinion. So each compartment might say that, okay, these two servers are allowed to talk to each other. These two are allowed to talk. And this is, the mesh network of what servers are allowed to talk to whom at what point. And regardless of those two can talk to each other, and these two can talk to each other. Those two talk to each other. But those two, flip this around to here. So don't worry, this will all make sense in a second. So within a mesh network of servers and compartmented information, whether these servers are in the exact same building on the exact same server rack, unless within the codes they are connected to share information, the only, in this particular image, the only way, these 6 here are the only ones that can talk to each other. You have this one off by itself, and you have this one off by itself, which means the only way you can know and understand the information that is held within each of these compartments is if you have access to those compartments. And again, that may be, these might be all within the same building, but without that physically connecting infrastructure, this is what we call the white line. And what that does is, let me do, there we go. And I'm gonna turn the transparency on that off. Okay, so what it does is it basically puts a box around it saying that those particular servers or compartments or whatever have information on it that only specific individuals who have access to that server can access that information. So within the various narratives and the various codes, now we have the compartmentation of information and understanding that access is what allows that first person view of the information. And that also equals who your source is. So again, as we are unraveling the information of a story, you have to ask yourself, where does this information come from? And that's where the various signals are. So where information so this can be the source, source of the signal, and what when it comes to being able to share a signal and share where the information comes from, you're having to, again, navigate that element of access. But also you have to understand that, again, as you are trying to figure out the source of the information, the code, all of the narratives, you also have the frame. And the frame of the story kind of goes into the biases. And what the signal wants you to take away or understand. So we have all of the different narratives that are covered with different codes, and all of those are sent through these signals that allow you access to understand a story. And whether the access is here, see everything in one thing. So when it comes to the access, that is the most contested, I guess, way of understanding the narratives within the patriarchal tech bros systems of attempting to control the narrative, and they control the narrative through the various codes, but also through the signals and who has access to those signals. And not only who has access to those signals, but when do they have access to those signals? How do they have access to those signals? And what frame they are looking at all of this through. So, I'm going to go a little bit here. So, when it comes to cybersecurity and access, there are certain elements that you have to know and understand. Is you have to know where the information is located. You have to understand who owns the information, and who owns the information, as well as who has read-write access. Because there's a difference between just being able to read and absorb the information and who has the ability to alter the information. Because the story, again, can change over time as more information is provided, as well as more information is highlighted to be incorrect or the frame of the information can also make something incorrect. And in the attempt to understand where the information is located, who owns the information, who has read-write access to the information, and what the information is being used for. So when it comes to public data encompasses a whole lot more information than the average individual realizes because of, and it goes back to this conversation of the FOIA Act of 1966, which is the Freedom of Information Act, where the United States basically said, hey, every citizen has a right to have access to information. However, and the caveat there comes back to this: who owns the information and who has, and where the information is located. Because in order to submit a FOIA request, you have to be able to answer these questions. You have to be able to basically walk an individual to the exact location where the information is stored in order to more or less prove that there is that need for first person view of the source of the access. Because if you're unable to do that, again, this comes back to the if you know, you know, of the protection of operations is done through the amount of time it takes to provide the information get access to the information, prove the information before the operation finishes, and be able to create change through that, if that makes sense. Kind of hope it does, but it can very quickly become convoluted and confusing, and that's okay. Which is why there is lie spheres inserted to the narrative, so that way, as an individual starts to piece together a story, and as I said, maybe the story is, now we'll take this as the internet. So going through the internet, this individual server shares it first and pushes it out to this one. He can then share the information with these two. And eventually, down the chain, everyone will find out, but the who finds out first allows those individuals to act upon the information before those on the, last rung of the ladder. However, it is also confined through compartments in order to maintain the security and the privacy of various individuals. And again, with access, that all comes into individuals providing access at a premium rate for the speed of access to that information. So the way that plays out within the AI world and how all of these various systems are able to start kind of working together and piecing together the picture is what information does each of these servers or each of these models have access to. And that is also where the tech bros begin hoarding information and why there are so many data centers that are needed. Now, I will fully admit that I have probably had, I don't know how many different email addresses. My data footprint over the years, if all of that information has never been deleted, you have to think how large of a footprint a single individual has. And if they do not go back through to clean up all of this data footprint of information, and all of it is just sitting on a server that is collecting dust. However, there's an individual who there's the one that owns the information, but there's also the one who has read-write access to the information. And that's also, what is the information being used for? As well as how long is the information kept? And this comes down to data privacy and data retention. That's the word I was looking for. Retention. So that is going to be your data privacy. Along with that one, this is going to deal with your data retention. Along with this. And if your data retention is, you can look it up. I think tax information you keep for 7 years. So anyone with a business purpose to maintain those records past 7 years, that comes into that question of, okay, how long are you keeping information for? But also, what is it being used for? Because if it's being used for different elements, that's also where the data retention comes in, and understanding how all of the narratives that are shrouded in code and sent through signals, which are often encrypted, and going into, at the end of the day, what is this information being used for? How long is the information being kept? And who owns the information with read and write access in order to be allowed to change the information? And maintaining all of this in a space that also provides data privacy, as well as, the security of systems when it comes to elements of corruption and all of that. So when it comes to being able to strip all of this down to the nuts and bolts of your data and the AI different algorithms and understandings, is all of these AI systems have been trained off of both publicly available information as well as unspoken ability to share information through the various platforms, terms of service, and whether or not you are allowing them to use that information for certain things. What every person should do, can do, is go through to edit their, or to audit their, data footprint in order to understand that picture of, okay, what of my information is public information? And where is that public information housed? Who has access to that information? And all of that, from the Freedom of Information Act of 1966 all the way through the various levels of laws that have been inputted since to maintain, again, the privacy and security of all of this information. And you have to ask yourself, one, at the end of the day, what are you comfortable with giving up in order to have security? Whether that is job security, whether that is financial security, whether that is health security, like all of these elements play into each other. And quite often, in order to receive access to different services, you must be willing to give up certain elements of privacy. And that is where we kind of fall into this world of, if, again, going to the various rights we have and going to freedom of the press and being able to say whatever you want to whomever you want, there are different words, different phrases that are added into the language of those initial rights that have you kind of question that you can say whatever you would like. However, you cannot lie, or you cannot knowingly lie and cause harm to another individual. So and that's where like all of the defamation cases are. It's why Trump hasn't sued anyone for calling him a pedophile, because in order to do that, you have to go through discovery, and going through discovery means providing access to information in order to prove definitively that something is or isn't fact. And all of that falls into the conversations of how do we maintain individual privacy and individual rights to security, freedom, being able to exist in the world without being terrorized on a regular basis, and what you as an individual are willing to give up to maintain certain what's the word I'm looking for? Certain security elements, I guess. So like in the whole security world, we talk about the triad of confidentiality, integrity, and accessibility. And in order to maintain the security of information, you kind of have to decide what of those elements you're going to kind of give up. So, in order to make something the most secure, the accessibility to that information is going to be extremely difficult. That doesn't mean it won't be able to be accessed. It just means you might have to put on sneakers and walk to the location in order to go old school and look at a hard piece of paper to go, yep, Here is the actual paper receipt for this information. But if it's information that is accessibility is the big thing, then the confidentiality of that information, which comes into questions of privacy and what is that information on, you're going to lose that. So it's this whole back and forth of understanding what elements are the most important to you, to your family, to your organization, whatever, in order to maintain the narrative. And that comes down to the history, the education, the politics, the entertainment, all of that. What are you willing to give up in order to maintain that level of life you want? So, with that, I know I kind of started a little bit late, a little bit later than I was. And like I said, with a crazy week, definitely we'll need to come back and go into signals, which we're going to do next week. But it is 12:30 and it is time to get some lunch. So I hope you all have a great weekend. And again, Fridays around 11, we're doing and learning how to hack the patriarchy. So that way we can ensure the safety and security of our families first and foremost as we are navigating this crazy world, crazy economy, crazy feeling of everything is on fire, and adding a little bit of levity as we do it. So, hope you guys have a great weekend and happy Friday. Bye.